Okay, so just a quick spoiler before the video actually starts. Everything does work out, and I am indeed able to modify the Anet display to put a rotary encoder and a button on it. It's not the greatest thing right now, it's a bit prototypey, so don't really follow the stuff in the video unless you're absolutely sure you want to potentially destroy a display and make a crappy button thingy, because everything I do is very prototypey and very mistakey, and I'm just posting it for posterity almost. I want to do a follow-up later where I do everything more properly and much more formally and more tutorially, maybe. But yeah, I just thought I'd give you a heads up. Everything works, but everything I do kind of sucks. So anyway, enjoy if you want to enjoy, and thanks for watching. This will hopefully be a relatively short video. Basically what I want to do is upgrade the display for my 3D printer that was once an Anet A8, and as anyone who's ever had an Anet A8 knows, one of the worst things about it, aside from nearly everything, is its display. It has these 2004 display, which isn't too bad, but it has these buttons, and they're big, they're clicky, they're annoying to push, they're not very responsive, and also I broke it, but luckily this button's pretty much useless, so it's not impacted the printer, but it still needs replacing. So I did some digging into how the Anet board is set up, and I checked some pin diagrams, and it turns out that the pins are basically, there's a power, a ground, 4 pins to control the display, 2 pins to enable it and reset it, and then 1 pin's used for the ADC keypad, which is this, and then the other pin's spare, which as far as I'm aware people usually hook up to a BL Touch or something. But anyway, what's nice is 2 of the pins that you use to control the display are the I2C bus. So I can replace 6 pins on this pinout with this board and only use 2 from the output controller, which gives me, I think, 4 or 5. Let me check the diagram. 1, 2, 3, 4. I think it gives me 4 pins in the end. Yeah, I think I recover 4 analog pins. And what's also convenient is 2 of the pins in here that are used with this. 2 of them have an interrupt attached, which means I can hopefully, if I replace the display control with an I2C controller, I can replace the rubbish ADC keypad with a rotary encoder, with an interrupt, and a small back button. So hopefully it will make the usage of this way better. So I did do some testing beforehand with an Arduino and this, and I could actually connect this to some of the pins on the back of this and have full control without having to do anything. But I think for future-proofing, because I'm going to change to a 3.3 volt system later, part of an upgradey thing that I'm going to do later, I am better off desoldering this display from this header board set and attaching it to this, and then building a separate control board that it plugs into. So I'm gonna go ahead and desolder this from here and solder it to this, and I'll hopefully be right back. I just realised it'd probably also be useful to summarise what parts I'm using. This is the Zone Star style LCD with an ADC keypad that comes with the Anet A8. This is an I2C to general purpose output bus expander chip thingy that's actually specifically designed to work with these types of displays. I've already tested it with this display. I've already tested it with this display as well as this smaller 1602 display, and it works fine. It's just specifically designed so that you can actually solder these straight to the back, and it works great. The chip model, let me just read that out so in case you want to search for that, is a PCF 8574T. And it's got a contrast control as well. It has pull-ups. The address lines are all pulled up, so it has an address of 0x27 by default, but it can be changed from 0x20 all the way up to 0x27. And then it's just got the I2C lines, the ground and the power, and then a separate thing to bridge the backlight of any of these displays. So you can actually power it with a different voltage if you want as well. Both of these displays have chips that are compatible with 3.3 volt and 5 volt logic, which is going to be very useful for me later. And then otherwise I've just got a generic rotary encoder, I think it's 20 position with a click, and then just a little soft button for the back button because I don't want to have super loud clicks whenever I do anything. I was contemplating putting a buzzer on this specific model, but I think I'm just going to keep it in a sort of prototypey style and attach the buzzer at a later time. So anyway, now I will attach this to this. I just thought it was important to list what I actually had in case you wanted to do the same thing. Alright, so I have detached the display from the original thing. I've made a right old mess of it, but it's detached now. I'm going to take this socket at a later date, but I don't need it for now. And I guess all that's left on here is the ADC keypad. Here's the original display. I've soldered it all up to the controller. and I've attached it to an Arduino, which already has a program from an example pack of an I2C liquid crystal display package. So if everything's worked correctly, there we go, works fine. So the next step now is to set up the rotary encoder and button setup. So whoop whoop. I think that'll take the rotary encoder, 3 resistors, 3 4.7k resistors, and some header pins, and that's basically it. So I'm going to do that now. Yay! Okay, it's been a couple of hours, and I've put together this very crappy looking test board, and by all accounts it is terrible. The wiring's bad. I'm pretty sure I messed up on this header and got some of the pins in the wrong place to what I wanted, and I can't actually fit one of these cables on underneath this at the same time, which was a bit of an oversight. But anyway, it'll be fine for testing. I'm not expecting this to win any beauty contests, but it should be good for testing. So I've got the rotary encoder. 2 pins on it are hooked up to pins that will eventually be interrupts. That's the click and one of the 2 turn pins. There's this button that's going to be used to cancel. There's 4 10k resistors used to pull up to VCC, and then they go to ground when they're pressed. So that's all set up. And then there's these headers which connect to the display with the I2C pins and stuff. And even though I've got everything out of the wrong order, I can just use these jumpers to check stuff. So I'm going to write a little program just to verify that the board even works. And, ooh, that's wobbly. And then we'll try updating some Marlin firmware to see if we can connect it to that. And then if it works, then I will probably try to design a better looking board, because I'm not the best at making PCBs, but this is ugly even for my work. But anyway, I'm going to knock up a quick Arduino sketch to have the display, test these buttons, see what happens, and then we'll try putting it on my 3D printer. So it's a new day. I have no idea why I thought I could just get this done in one day. I guess I'm just not very wise. I did try to write a program to test out this keypad thingy, and the program works, I think, but there's something weird going on with this. I had it hooked up to the Arduino, and the little button works, but the encoder was behaving strangely, and there was some kind of signal noise, and I don't know if it was some bad DuPont connectors, or my bad soldering, or some cheap solder causing problems, but it was noisy. I tried checking it with a multimeter, but as soon as I touched anything with a multimeter, it behaved normally, but I can't permanently attach a multimeter in a final thing, so I don't know why that is, but whatever. I did at least manage to get the display working. I started at like 11 o'clock at night, and then after sifting through Marlin for like 3 hours and trial and erroring stuff, I managed to get this display working. So I'm just going to show you. There's the 4 wires connected to this, the 4 wires connected to the cable that connects to the Anet board, and I'm going to power it on. And these DuPont cables are shoddy too, so hopefully they're connected right when I power this on. And there you go. Look, it just fires straight up. So the display is working. I just have no input currently, so I'm going to grab another rotary encoder and just see if I can breadboard it so that I at least have an input, and then I will know for a fact whether or not it works. I will show what changes I made to the Marlin firmware when I've got the encoder working, so I can just sort of show it at once, but I just want to say, or show as a proof of concept, that the I2C display is working with the Anet board using only the 4 pins, 2 power and the I2C bus, which is giving me 6 currently spare analog read pins. So I'm going to obviously use 3 of them probably for the encoder, which still leaves me with 3. So 1 for a back button and then 2 spare, I guess. So I could still attach a BL touch if I felt like it, but I think I might use one to control a relay if possible. Anyway, more on that soon. I'm going to see if I can actually get some kind of encoder input working on this. Okay, I can now confirm this encoder works. I can now count up and down with each step. A bit funky because of how I've got everything clicked together. Turns out rotary encoders just really hate breadboards, and I broke one trying to get it in. So it's now missing the ground pin for the spinny bit, which is annoying. Maybe I can open it up and fix it. I have no clue. But anyway, yeah, the rotary encoder is working here. I don't know what business was going on the other board. I'm going to try the other board again quickly just in case. But yeah, I should at least be able to try something eventually. Okay, so my board is definitely broken as heck. I've just got the encoder itself hooked up to the thing and it's just doing whatever it wants. And if I press the button, the counter goes up too for some reason. I must have just messed up on the wiring somewhere else here, so that's kind of sad. Whatevs. Okay, so I just made quickly a breadboard-friendly encoder, and now everything mostly works. I can count up, I can count down, and I can click, and it doesn't do anything strange. Well, I mean, it sometimes like skips stuff backwards and stuff. I'm not really sure, some additional encoder noise maybe, but nothing's leaking through anymore, and it's generally doing what I want. It's possible when it's actually connected to a controller, I mean like the 3D printer control board, it might actually behave properly. So let's, fingers crossed. Okay, one final note on the prototype. I have just stuck a couple of capacitors across the pins for the encoder, and it seems to have mostly eliminated the noise now. I can turn it as fast as I want and it seems to go up, turn it as fast as I want the other way and it goes down. Let's see if I can get that in shot. Zoop, 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 zoop. It's not necessarily fast all the time, but that's not a big issue, and I can seem to be able to go in steps exactly as I want now. It seems to sometimes miss a pulse, but that's not as bad as sometimes adding a pulse, or just going the wrong way. So I'm pretty happy with that. I'm going to try it with the actual printer now. Let's hope it works. Okay, so after even more trial and error, and messing with the hardware, and customizing Marlin's firmware, it seems to be working. I have a rotary encoder which can open the menu, navigate through it. I have added a back button so I can cancel out of menus or cancel setting changes, and it just works. I'm quite pleased. Everything's working now. I've got that on the I2C. I've got that occupying 3 pins total. I've got that occupying a pin, and then there's the 2 spare pins, and one of them I've connected to this relay, which I can just change by going to spindle control. I don't know if you can hear that click. That's got no particular purpose, that's just there for fun, I'm sure. But yeah, everything's done. There's a spare pin as well left. I'm not going to change anything with that, that's not important enough. But yeah, it seems to work. So I'm going to convert this into a proper board. In hindsight, I probably should have done this test in the first place so that I could do this properly. So that's kind of a waste. I'll see if I can get the encoder back off and do it better. And I'll probably still use one of these soft buttons for a cancel button instead of a clicky one. And I will get a new board made. I will properly map out these pins on a piece of paper so I remember. And then I shall talk about the firmware changes I've done. Because they weren't major firmware changes, but they weren't super clear. So I will talk about what I had to change in order to get this to work. But now that it does work, it works really great, and I love it, and I'm glad I've done this. Okay, well that took way too long for such an ugly looking board. It started out going really well, and then all the little pads started delaminating left, right and centre, and everything just went crazy, and solder wouldn't want to stick. It's possible my dirt cheap equipment is failing me, but that couldn't possibly be true. Well anyway, I've got the board now. It's got the encoder, it's got the button, it's got a plug for the display. It's obviously not the best thing to support the whole unit, but this isn't the final version. The final version will hopefully not be handmade. It's got a little header out for the spare pins, and it's got this plug. It's not using the proper socket yet because I'm saving that for later, but it works very simply. I can just now finally, that'll work, plug that in, and that's done. And then I can connect that, and that's done. So now everything's in one place, everything's fits together. Now if I power it on, the display fires up, and we can see everything. Let me just try and focus that. So yeah, I've got the back button does nothing on this menu, but I can now enter the menu, scroll again, press the cancel button to go back without confirming settings. And then I can use this little row of headers to very sneakily get to the relay I have. Make sure I get the pins right, VCC and ground. So they go on like that. Here we go, red light to show everything's working. And then I should just be able to connect this last one to the bottom pin. There we go, it clicks because I've made it so that it's active when it's off. And then if I just go into spindle control, then I can do this. Hopefully you can hear the click. There we go, everything is finally done. Like I said, not the final version of the board, but that hint also has nothing to do with this spindle controller or anything. That took way too much work, considering how simple it was. I don't know if my soldering's just got worse or what. But anyway, now I'll talk about the firmware changes necessary. And also, just quickly, here's my very rubbish diagram that helped me remember where I was supposed to put everything. I'll probably make a proper diagram in case anyone else wants to do this, which I'll probably do in a follow-up video when I redo this properly, because right now it's obviously looks like that. Anyway, moving on. I thought it was worth showing even though it doesn't look the best and didn't work out the best, because, you know, that's how things go. So, we'll move over to the software next. I will discuss that. Okay, so here I am at my computer. I've got Marlin open in the Arduino IDE. So let's talk about what we need to change in the firmware in order to get everything done. So I've got my configuration H file open, and the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to hit Control and F to open the find thing, and I'm going to search for Zone Star. And that will take me... that's the wrong place. Okay, so I'll click it twice, I'll click it thrice, I'll click it 4 times, until we get to the Zone Star LCD here. And we'll know it's the right thing because it says Anet and Tronxy 20x4 controller. And all we need to do here is comment that out, and then we scroll down just a little bit, and we'll find this LCD SaneSmart I2C 2004. And if we uncomment that out, that tells the display driver in Marlin that we are using an I2C display with 20x4 characters, and this specific SaneSmart one uses a similar controller to the one I soldered to the back of the display, which is why it works. But this isn't all you need to do, and this actually had me stuck for a couple of hours while I tried to figure out what else I needed, and thanks to Visual Studio Code for existing, I was able to track down what I needed. All you need to do is define, I believe it is ulti-panel. And if you don't define that, then none of the display stuff works. And that's actually everything you need to do in configuration.h in order to enable the I2C display. However, this now means that you have no buttons that work, and those things, in order to re-enable the working buttons, you have to go to your pins file. I have a pins file open. In my case, it's the Anet board because that's the one I'm talking about. And you can find that under the folder structure. If you go to your Marlin installation directory, go to source and then pins, and then under the Sanguino folder, there is the pins Anet 10. And if you drag and drop that on top of your Arduino IDE, it will open the file up. And then we basically just want to scroll down to the bottom where it has all the LCD stuff defined. I have no idea why this is yellow. I think I accidentally did that, but I'm not sure. It's like it's in a selection box, but won't stop. Anyway, not important. I commented out all this display stuff. I don't think you need to, because has SPI LCD should be false in this specific case, but I commented it out just in case there are any conflicts, which Control and K does not do that on this. That is Game Maker. Apparently it opens the directory, which is useful, but not what I wanted. So if we select all that, right-click, and just comment it, then it'll not do anything. And now we need to define some pins for the encoder. And I'll be defining the pin numbers based on a graphic I will show on the display now, which is the setup I used because it puts one of the encoder pins on an interrupt. I don't know if that's essential. And then just uses all the other pins as necessary. The I2C bus is automatically used correctly, so we don't have to worry about those pins. So we need to define 3 pins for the encoder. And in my case, I also defined the back button so that you could cancel setting changes because I wanted that feature. And then you can also define encoder pulses per step and encoder steps per menu item, but I'll just add those afterwards. So once we've defined these definitions, Marlin will automatically use the rotary encoder. We don't have to do anything else after this. We just have to define the pins. So let's define them. There is BTN, 4 button, N1, which is the first encoder pin. In my case, I define that as 11. If I define... well, I also need to define BTN N2. I also need to spell that with a T and not a Y. And I put that on hardware pin 30. If you're curious as to how I decided on these pins, I actually scrolled down a bit more and I based it off of this chart, basically. I worked out which ones these were, found the actual hardware pin, and then mapped it across. Okay, and then define BTN NC. This is the click button on the encoder, and I used 29. And then I had to define the back button, which was btn back. I actually took some digging to actually find this. I couldn't find any official documentation on this, and I had to navigate through the menu source code in order to find it. But once I found it, it was fine. That's all the buttons defined. The rotary encoder will now work. You'll just want to make sure you've got some other settings configured, and that's just your pulses per step and your steps per menu item. And I just have them defined as follow: 4 pulses per step, 1 per menu item. I think that's actually the default. But, you know, it works. It's what I've got defined. I think there's one last thing to note, and that's if you use a different I2C driver to the one I use, you might have to define the I2C address. By default, it defines it as OX27, but you might want to define the I2C address as something else if that's not the same address as yours. My specific model is I believe it's a PCF 8574. The default one for the SaneSmart model is the PCF 8575, but they function exactly identically, so it does not matter. And I think that just about covers it for software. So when you compile this and upload it and have everything plugged in correctly, it just works. Like I say, I'll cover this a bit more properly in a future video, hopefully. But for now, that should be it. So I'm going to go to the outro now. Bye. So thanks for giving this a watch. As you can see, everything did work out, even though, like I said at the beginning, it was a bit prototypey, a bit mistakey, and I do recommend not doing this unless you're absolutely sure what you're doing and are willing to risk potentially destroying a display. I did this because I wanted to save a few pence, and the controls on the display weren't really working great, so it felt like I needed to do this anyway. Plus, after I do the final modification to this, this is going to prove very useful for a later project I have, so... You know, a bunch of reasons all added up, and like if I'd got a replacement display entirely and did something like this, then I'd have a display with these useless buttons still attached to it. So I'd have like a part sitting around that I would want to use but couldn't really because it was terrible. So this sort of benefits me, saves me buying stuff, saves me wasting stuff, helps me recycle stuff. Because I mean, like I said, this is completely broken. I broke this button dropping it on the floor. These buttons are annoying as hell to press, and I hate them. So this was a recycling process that has worked out in the end fine. So anyway, yes, thank you for watching. I hope you sort of enjoyed my weird mess around. It all worked out. I'm pretty happy, even though like this is a hunk of junk, but it works. It feels better. It feels better than this somehow. This somehow feels better than this. It's less. It's more wobbly. I don't like how wobbly it is currently, but that'll be fixed later. But it feels nicer. So, all in all, I'm glad. Thank you so much for watching. Okay, thanks, love you, bye.